How you doing? Hello everybody and welcome back to the EducatedCollins Snap channel. Today we are having our Mobius first impressions. It's been out for a couple of hours and got some thoughts on the card. Definitely also some build ideas. Though I wouldn't say it's like a build around card. It's definitely more of a tech addition. So definitely a lot to talk about. This was a very, hyped card. So we'll see. Alright, so first off, Mobius is a 2 energy, 3 power card with the ongoing effect. Your cost cannot be increased, your opponent's cost can not be reduced. So I do want to mention there are some like clarifications that need to be done with Mobius. Playing if both players have Mobius, it does not cancel each other out. What happens is that all cards will be at their base cost and will stay there. So people were really theorizing like playing Death Wave and stuff like that. That doesn't really work here because if you have Mobius, your opponent has Mobius, that death is max cost. It's not getting discounted at all, even if two of them are on the field. So it's not like, oh, you play two, it's like Daredevil. That's not the case. So that's something people have been considering. So death is not really playable right now in this meta. I think it's too much of a liability, and just things like She-Hulk as well. Like even if you both have Mobius, the She-Hulk doesn't work. So that's something that should be mentioned, right? So but generally, right, this kind of stops some decks from doing things, I would say. So Loki gets a slight nerf, even though I still think you can play Loki. But things like Mr. Negative are not going to work here. Zabu's a little bit worse. Sera, stuff like that. Like discount cards, really not really having the greatest time. Now, you can still play around it a little bit, right? You can tech in some tech cards, but it's still going to annoy you. So just keep that in mind. But yeah, definitely an interesting card. I will say first day in, maybe not meta changing, right? Kind of like Loki and Eliath were. Those definitely created some new decks and brought some decks in the line. It's still early, but I am seeing a lot of people just kind of play their same decks. I would say maybe it's because Mobius doesn't really force you to build new stuff. It kind of enhances already viable decks. So a lot of people have been doing that, just playing their same decks. I've still seen a lot of high evolutionary, still seeing a lot of Lyeth, seeing less Loki, I will say, but Loki is still there. It's not like they're gone. It's just like more people are playing other things. So it's still the same kind of decks, the same kind of meta. It's just that there's more Mobius, there's been more Rogue. So Rogue has been teched in as well, to kind of deal with it. There's also some more wave as well. Mobius wave on 5, definitely now possible. But I would say overall the meta hasn't really felt like it's changed dramatically with the addition of Mobius. I will like Mobius is in a lot of decks. I will like so there's a new card, but is people playing different archetypes? No, that's my takeaway. So that's something I wanted to mention in here. But in terms of like, should you get the card? Should you buy it? I definitely still am in the agreement that you should get the card, even if the meta hasn't changed. Still think it's worth buying with tokens. Like everyone's playing the card, right? Like that in itself should tell you that it's worth getting, because even if the meta isn't changing, people are saying, oh, for now it's worth the investment, right? Good players are still playing it. Even though they're not playing different decks, they're still adding the card in. You can get it with tokens. That would be my preferred method, but you can get it with spotlights if you don't have high evolutionary, or you can get it with bundles if you can wait 2 months. Now, I don't like bundles is my least favorite option, kind of, because you have to wait the 2 weeks. If you wait 2 weeks, not 2 months, yeah, you have to wait the 2 weeks. And there's also bundles I think are just as good or better than the form and function bundle. So you can definitely do it with gold. If you have gold, you don't have spotlights or tokens. Like that's a perfectly good option. But I think if you can get rid tokens, that's the way to go. And if you're missing high evolutionary, spotlights are also pretty good. So I will say not having Mobius will hurt. I think that's pretty clear. Like Mobius into wave on 5 or Mobius into wave on 3 are pretty annoying. Like that is a huge advantage if you don't tech it. The weird thing about Mobius into wave on 3 is it's a little bit scary if your opponent has rogue, and there's a lot of rogues. So if you go Mobius into wave on 3 and they rogue you, they get to play anything they want, and you can only play a 4-drop. So that's really not um that good where you set up a position where they can mess you up super hard. So I've been seeing less Mobius into wave, but Mobius into Cosmo I think is reasonable in terms of like they can't rogue you, but you do need priority, so maybe you need a 1-drop. So blah 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 blah. We're going into like high meta stuff anyways. But yeah, definitely still think Mobius is playable, still think Mobius will be in the meta. And it also seems like it's going to be a tech card that people are going to use anyways. Kind of like Luke Cage, kind of like um, Shadow King, those type of tech cards. Seems like Luke Cage, not Luke Cage, but Mobius fits into that. So definitely will be something that you'll probably bust out anytime the meta gets too crazy in discounts. So seems like a card you will want. Just doesn't have that same like low-key Eliath metagame shifting potential that we were hoping for. That's my takeaway. Still think you should get it though. I do want to mention some things about the card or some things that you might not know for a while that is pretty important. First thing is that Spider Ham does not really work well right now in this meta. So if you play Spider Ham into someone with a Mobius down, or if you play Spider Ham and then they play Mobius afterwards, that pick card will cost 0 because your cards cannot be increased, and the base cost of a picked card is 0. So if they pig you, you play Mobius, that card that got pigged is now 0 cost with the same power, right? So if they pick a Hulk, if they pick an Infinite, unlikely. But if they pick a big card of yours, it's just, and you play Mobius, it's just a 0-6 or 0-10, whatever it is. So that interaction pretty much means that Spider Ham's kind of unplayable right now. I would just not play Spider Ham at all. So unless they change that in some way or anything like that, this is just not not an interaction you want to have. So I just wouldn't play Spider Ham. So just keep that in mind. And then just the second one, right? You might be seeing a lot of rogues in this meta. I would say that it's not going to last. Like, so this kind of rogue heavy meta reminds me of Luke Cage when High Evolutionary came out. So a lot of people were playing Luke Cage on 2 and then High Evolutionary, or then Rogue on 3 to kind of hit their Luke Cage, that kind of thing. Same thing with like Zabu. A lot of people were playing Rogue into Zabu, those kind of things, right? Like it's pretty good now because there's so many people experimenting with Mobius, but it's definitely not gonna last, right? It's gonna fall off a bit. So definitely, I would definitely think you should take advantage of being able to use Rogue right now, but I wouldn't necessarily like have it as a staple in your deck design, unless you're playing like Silver Surfer, where Silver Surfer you can play Rogue as a staple and it makes sense. So unless you're doing something like that, wouldn't necessarily like build around the Rogue, but for now it's really good. So just keep that in mind if you're playing Mobius. Like, hey, what am I gonna do if they rogue me next turn, or things like that. So those are just some things I want to mention here before we move on. All right, so next thing I do want to talk about is just the spotlights. So this was the spotlights I made at the beginning of the month, just kind of reviewing them. I still agree with pretty much all of it. I'm pretty happy that I haven't had to go back and say, oh, this was incorrect here. Still think Mobius is worth it, especially if you're missing High Evolutionary. Like, I would say get Mobius High Evolutionary. Well, you're really shooting for High Evolutionary. Mobius is just a good benefit on top, right? Like that's good to get. So if you're missing High Evolutionary, still think you should get it here. And then if we go down, if you are missing Mobius with with it, and you already have High Evolutionary, then I would say get it with tokens, right? Like, or the bundle if you really want to. The bundle, I don't like waiting the 2 weeks to get the bundle, and there's already bundles I think are better, so that's why I'm iffy on using the bundle. But you can, like, you definitely can. You just have to wait. So, but yeah, preferably get with tokens. However, if you're missing High Evolutionary, feel free to get it with Spotlights for sure. Next up, we do have some build guides. Always have some build guides. There's a lot of build guides here, but the thing with Mobius is it's not creating new decks, right? It's just saying, hey, this buffs your old or your current deck. It doesn't really feel like it's making new decks. So High Evolutionary was pretty popular before the drop, and still popular. You just tech in Mobius and it's the same, works the same. It's like, like, I know, like, hey, we were hoping for a new meta with Mobius coming out, but it really hasn't. The only real difference I've seen is some people are playing like Move. Honestly, that's what I've seen, and then there's a little bit less Loki, but there's still Loki, and I think Loki's still fine. So Loki's a problem. Like, we already knew this, right? But Loki doesn't, like, it cares a little bit, but you're still kind of fine with Loki, even in this meta. So it's like, like, definitely a collector maybe was not like the problem card. I mean, it is a strong card though. Collector with Loki, it's a strong card, but like that's not like the reason why Loki's good. But yeah, High Evolutionary still works pretty fine here. Next up, we have Move deck. I would say like Move. Not it's not. This isn't a Move deck. This is like Silky Smooth ish, Silky Smooth Eliath. Like that has been really doing well. I would say a lot of people have been playing this. You don't really need the Captain Marvel. That one could be filler for anything you want, but it works for sure. So, but yeah, this type of deck just with Mobius in, you get to play Mobius Wave if you want. If they're not doing anything funky themselves, so definitely definitely works. Right, Mobius Wave is pretty good too. You can do them into Eliath, like a lot of options. So, pretty good tech. This is definitely seen some versions of this as well in the meta, so makes sense to me. Next up, we have one thing. Like, all right, I'm not good. Well, anyways, let's move on. Shuri, I think Shuri's a composition that actually like benefits in the deck design from Mobius, because something really bad about Shuri is not being able to play Shuri on curve, right? Like you get Iceman, you get location screwed, anything like that, you can't play your curve. That really hurts a lot. And like Iceman hurts quite a bit. Like if they Iceman your Red Skull or your Taskman, anything like that, like you really lose out a lot. So I do think um Mobius does do well in Shuri decks as like a auto include, kind of like Armor is auto include. Could definitely see Mobius also doing that. This one has the Kitty Pride kind of secondary win condition where you just make a huge kitty and then you Taskmaster it as well. So definitely Sauron Shuri is also another like super viable Shuri deck that you can tech Mobius in. This is just the one. They all like this all represents Shuri. This is just the one I highlighted here. Next up we do have yes, the Forge Absorbing Man Brood setup. Like it's just a good deck and you can play Mobius in it. Like honestly, like you can see what I'm saying, right? A lot of the decks are just the same. They just have Mobius in them now. Like that's it. They're the same list. They just have Mobius in it because you need it for the counter matchups. You need it if people are playing Mobius into Wave, right? That kind of thing. It gets annoying. Like Mobius into Wave is actually very obnoxious. Like that interaction is not. It's hard to deal with if you don't have Mobius yourself, right? So that's something to keep in mind. But here, like, let's say they rogue you, right? You don't really care, like whatever. Yeah, like it's bad maybe if they rogue you and then they wave you. But even if they wave you, like you're still just playing one card anyway, so it's not even that big of a problem. So that's kind of the idea. Like the Mobius is just like to deal with other people playing Mobius and Wave, but it has good base stats, so it's not like too hard to just run. Um, No Jeff, but yeah, you're probably fine anyways. Next up, we do have a more traditional Surfer. So the Surfer's a deck that can actually run Rogue without really, without it really feeling bad. This is a Sera version of it, so you're kind of taking away their Mobius, right? Is the idea here. Another thing you could do is run Wave, as well instead of like a Killmonger or something like or your Polaris. Like you could take out a 3 and run Wave, right? Now then you get yourself the option of going Mobius into Wave into Sera, which I think is pretty powerful, as well. So that's something you could have adjust here. But generally, the idea is like Surfer, you can run Mobius, you can run Rogue. It makes sense, and it's not like a detriment that having a Rogue. So it's something you can do. So feel free to experiment here. And then I believe this is the last one. Here we have, of course, Cerebro 3, Mobius, 3 drop, 3 power. You gotta play it in a Cerebro deck. Da 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 da. Can work here. You can play Wave as well, right? Also 3. So it's just seems like something that makes sense to do. Am I gonna test it? No, I'm not. I'm sorry, but there's always that ever-present Cerebro 3 community that does love doing it, and here's something that does work out for you. So overall, right, when it comes to Cerebro, honestly, I was hoping the meta would shift. I was hoping that there would be a lot less Loki, which there is less Loki, that's true. But like, I wanted him to be gone, like, which is not true, right? It's like even if you're playing Mobius, you're not guaranteed to get it on 2. So people can just Loki on 3, Loki on 4, and then pop off and play normal for the rest of the game. So it's still Loki's still pretty powerful overall, but yeah, definitely a card you should be getting. I still think it's worth getting. But it's not like the thing is if you don't have it, you're going to be annoyed by not having it because they'll just they'll Mobius wave you, especially if you're playing like Conquest and they know you don't have any tech, like they could just full abuse it. So I do think it's something you want to be getting, but generally like it hasn't really felt like, oh my god, meta changing, where Loki and Elias did have, oh my god, kind of meta changing effect. So that's my initial take. Maybe I'll adjust, and definitely, it's interesting to build decks that could deal with it. Like Sandman seems like something that could definitely work if people are going full heavy Mobius wave on 5. Then you can just Sandman and negate that kind of game plan. So there's definitely some strategies here to be aware of. But yeah, overall, that's my thoughts on Mobius. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one.
EducatedCollins snap. Once you watch him, you won't go back. He'll teach you to marvel snap. Your skills will be